Matthew Superstars. It's Mrs. R, and today we're going to start where we left off in the middle of chapter 7. Do you remember Grandma had just drunk the medicine and she began to experience some things, right? So the last sentence that I read in the previous video was, "Marvelous medicine," George told himself. He found it fascinating to stand there and watch what it was doing to the old hag. What next, he wondered. He soon found out. Suddenly, she began to grow. It was quite slow at first, just a very gradual inching upward, up, up, up. Inch by inch, getting taller and taller, about an inch every few seconds, and in the beginning, George didn't notice it. But when she had passed the 5'6" mark and was going on towards being 6 feet tall, George gave a jump and shouted, "Hey, Grandma, you're growing! You're going up! Hang on, Grandma, you better stop now or you'll be hitting the ceiling." But Grandma didn't stop. It was a truly fantastic sight, this ancient, scrawny old woman getting taller and taller, longer and longer, thinner and thinner, as though she were a piece of elastic being pulled upwards by invisible hands. When the top of her head actually touched the ceiling, George thought she was bound to stop. But she didn't. There was a sort of scrunching noise, and bits of plaster and cement came raining down. "Hadn't you better stop now, Grandma?" George said. "Daddy's just had this whole room repainted." But there was no stopping her now. Soon her head and shoulders had completely disappeared through the ceiling, and she was still going. George dashed upstairs to his own bedroom, and there she was coming up through the floor like a mushroom. "Whoopee!" she shouted, finding her voice at last. "Hallelujah! Here I come!" "Steady on, Grandma," George said. "With a high naughty no and up we go," she shouted. "Just watch me grow." "This is my room," George said. "Look at the mess you're making." "Terrific medicine," she cried. "Give me some more." She's dotty as a donut, George thought. "Come on, boy, give me some more," she yelled out. "Dish it out, I'm slowing down." George was still clutching the medicine bottle in one hand and the spoon in the other. Oh well, he thought, why not? He poured out a second dose and popped it into her mouth. "Oh, wee!" she screamed, and up she went again. Her feet were still on the floor downstairs in the living room, but her head was moving quickly towards the ceiling of the bedroom. "I'm on my way now, boy," she called down to George. "Just watch me go." "That's the attic above you, Grandma," George called out. "I'd keep out of there. It's full of bugs and boggles." Crash! The old girl's head went through the ceiling as though it were butter. George stood in his bedroom gazing at the shambles. There was a big hole in the floor and another in the ceiling, and sticking up like a post between the two was the middle part of Grandma. Her legs were in the room below. Her head was in the attic. Here's the head coming out of George's room. And here's what she looked like with her head in the attic and her feet down below and the middle part. "I'm still going," came the old screechy voice from above. "Give me another dose, my boy, and let's go through the roof." "No, Grandma, no," George called back. "You're busting up the whole house." "To heck with the house," she shouted. "I want some fresh air. I haven't been outside for 20 years. By golly, she is going through the roof, George told himself. He ran downstairs. He rushed out the back door into the yard. It would be simply awful, he thought, if she bashed up the roof as well. His father would be furious, and he, George, would get the blame. He had made the medicine. He had given her too much. "Don't come through the roof, Grandma," he prayed. "Please don't." Next chapter, the brown hen. George stood in the farmyard, looking up at the roof. The old farmhouse had a fine roof of pale red tiles and tall chimneys. There was no sign of Grandma. There was only a single song thrush sitting on one of the chimney pots, singing a song. The old wurzels got stuck in the attic, George thought. Thank goodness for that. Suddenly a tile came clattering down from the roof and fell into the yard. The song thrush took off fast and flew away. Then another tile came down, then half a dozen more. And then, very slowly, like some weird monster rising up from the deep, Grandma's head came through the roof. Then her scrawny neck and the top of her shoulders. "How am I doing, boy?" she shouted. "How's that for a bash-up?" Don't you think you better stop now, Grandma? George called out. I have stopped, she answered. I feel terrific. Didn't I tell you I had magic powers? Didn't I warn you I had wizardry in the tips of my fingers? But you wouldn't listen to me, would you? You wouldn't listen to your old grandma. You didn't do it, Grandma, George shouted back to her. I did it. I made you a new medicine. A new medicine? You? What rubbish, she yelled. I did, George shouted. You're lying as usual, Grandma yelled. You're always lying. I'm not lying, Grandma. I swear I'm not. The wrinkled old face high up on the roof stared down suspiciously at George. Are you telling me you actually made a new medicine all by yourself? She shouted. Yes, Grandma, all by myself. I don't believe you, she answered, but I'm very comfortable up here. Fetch me a cup of tea. A brown hen was pecking about in the yard close to where George was standing. The hen gave him an idea. Quickly, he uncorked the medicine and poured some of the brown stuff into the spoon. Watch this, Grandma, he shouted. He crouched down, holding the spoon to the hen. Chicken, he said. Chick, chick, chicken. Come here, have some of this. Chickens are stupid birds and very greedy. They think everything is food. This one thought the spoon was full of corn. It hopped over. It put its head on one side and looked at the spoon. Come on, chicken, George said. Good, chicken, chick, chick, chick. The brown hen stretched out its neck towards the spoon and went peck. It got a beak full of medicine. The effect was electric. A-wee! Shrieked the hen, and it shot straight up into the air like a rocket. It went as high as the house. Then down it came again into the yard, splosh, and then it sat with its feathers all sticking straight out from its body. There was a look of amazement on its silly face. George stood watching it. Grandma, up on the roof, was watching it too. The hen got to its feet. It was rather shaky. It was making funny gurgling noises in its throat. Its beak was opening and shutting. It seemed pretty sick then. You've done it in, you stupid boy, Grandma shouted. That hen's gonna die. Your father will be right after you. He'll give you socks and serve you right. All of a sudden, black smoke started pouring out of the hen's beak. It's on fire, Grandma yelled. The hen's on fire. George ran to the water trough to get a bucket of water. That hen will be roasted and ready for eating any moment, Grandma shouted. George sloshed the bucket of water over the hen. There was a sizzling sound and the smoke went away. Old hen's laid its last egg, Grandma shouted. Hens don't do any laying after they've been on fire. Now that the fire was out, the hen seemed better. It stood up properly, flapped its wings, then it crouched down low to the ground as though it was getting ready to jump. It did jump. It jumped high in the air and turned a complete somersault, then landed back on its feet. It's a circus hen, Grandma shouted from the rooftop. It's a flippin' acrobat. Now the hen began to grow. George had been waiting for this to happen. It's growing, he yelled. It's growing, Grandma. Look, it's growing. Bigger and bigger and taller it grew. Soon the hen was 4 or 5 times its normal size. Can you see it, Grandma? George shouted. I can see it, boy, the old girl shouted back. I'm watching it. George was hopping about from one foot to the other with excitement, pointing at the enormous hen and shouting, It had the magic medicine, Grandma, and it's growing just like you did. There was a difference between the way the hen was growing and the way Grandma grew. When Grandma grew taller and taller, she got thinner and thinner. The hen didn't. It stayed nice and plump all along. Soon it was taller than George, but it didn't stop there. It went right on growing until it was about as big as a horse. Then it stopped. Doesn't it look marvelous, Grandma? George shouted. It's not as tall as me, Grandma sang out. Compared with me, that hen is titchy small. I am the tallest of them all. Next chapter. The title is The Pig, the Bullocks, the Sheep, the Pony, and the Nanny Goat. At that moment, George's mother came back from shopping in the village. She drove her car into the yard and got out. She was carrying a bottle of milk in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other. The first thing she saw was the gigantic brown hen towering over little George. She dropped the bottle of milk. Then Grandma started shouting at her from the rooftop, and when she looked up and saw Grandma's head sticking up through the tiles, she dropped the bag of groceries. How about that then, eh, Mary? Grandma shouted. I'll bet you've never seen a hen as big as that. That's George's giant hen, that is. But, stammered George's mother. It's George's magic medicine, Grandma shouted. We both of us just had it, the hen and I. How in the world did you get up on the roof? Cried the mother. I didn't, cackled the old woman. My feet are still standing on the ground in the living room. This was too much for George's mother to understand. She just goggled and gaped. She looked as though she was going to faint. A second later, George's father appeared. His name was Mr. Killiecranky. Mr. Cranky was a small man with bandy legs and a huge head. He was a kind father to George, but he was not an easy person to live with because even the smallest thing got him all worked up and excited. The hen standing in the yard was certainly not a small thing, and when Mr. Cranky saw it, he started jumping about as though something was burning his feet. "Great heavens!" he cried, waving his arms. "What's this? What happened? Where did it come from? It's a giant hen! Who did it?" "I did," George said. "Look at me!" Grandma shouted from the rooftop. "Never mind about the hen. What about me?" Mr. Cranky looked up and saw Grandma. "Shut up, Grandma," he said. It didn't seem to surprise him that the old girl was sticking up through the roof. It was the hen that excited him. He had never seen anything like it, but then who had? "It's fantastic," Mr. Cranky shouted, dancing round and round. "It's colossal. It's gigantic. It's tremendous. It's a miracle. How'd you do it, George?" George started telling his father about the magic medicine. While he was doing this, the big brown hen sat down in the middle of the yard and went cluck, 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 cluck. Everyone stared at it. Here's the picture of the mom and the dad. When it stood up again, there was a brown egg lying there. The egg was the size of a football. That egg would make scrambled eggs for 20 people, Mrs. Cranky said. "George," Mr. Cranky shouted, "how much of this medicine do you have?" "Lots," George said. "There's a big saucepan full in the kitchen, and this bottle here's nearly full." "Come with me," Mr. Cranky yelled, grabbing George by the arm. "Bring the medicine. For years and years I've been trying to breed bigger and bigger animals, bigger bulls for beef, bigger pigs for pork, bigger sheep for mutton." They went to the pigsty first. George gave a spoonful of medicine to the pig. The pig blew smoke from its nose and jumped about all over the place. Then it grew and grew. In the end, it looked like this. They went to the herd of fine black bullocks that Mr. Cranky was trying to fatten for the market. George gave each of them some medicine, and this is what happened. Then the sheep. He gave some to the gray pony, Jack Frost, and finally, just for fun, he gave some to Alma, the nanny goat. The last chapter, or the next chapter, is called A Crane for Grandma. And I think we'll stop there, and we'll continue next week. What do you think is going to happen with number one, Grandma? Is she going to be stuck for all eternity with her head above the roof and her feet down on the living room floor? What's going to happen with all the giant animals? And the chicken just laid like a football-sized egg. You guys, this is a little nuts. Do you think it's all going to go back? What do you think? Has Roald Dahl given us any clues as to what's going to happen? Let's think about that for a minute. And as you do, just remember, I'll see you next week when we'll read a few more chapters. We are more than halfway through the book, and we'll find out what happens to George, his marvelous medicine, most of all Grandma, stuck up there above the roof. Pretty crazy. Stay safe, Matthew Superstars, and I'll see you next week.